Welcome to Unfiltered Reflections. I'm your host, Passion, and today we're diving into a world that feels both intimately familiar and profoundly alien. A world where the lines between our digital selves and our true selves blur, where convenience whispers sweet nothings in our ears, promising ease and connection, while subtly, almost imperceptibly, asking for a piece of our very essence in return. Join me as we explore the hidden corners of our connected lives through the eyes of a woman who found herself navigating this intricate dance, a dance of shadows and light, of presence and absence. The rain outside Amelia's window was a soft, persistent drumming, a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to her life. Each drop seemed to carry a tiny forgotten memory, blurring the edges of her city apartment, just as her own thoughts often blurred the edges of her days. She was 38, a graphic designer who worked from home, her world largely contained within the glowing rectangle of her laptop and the sleek obsidian slab she carried everywhere. This slab, this device, was her constant companion. It woke her with a gentle chime, reminded her of appointments, navigated her through labyrinthine city streets, and connected her to a sprawling network of friends, family, and fleeting acquaintances. It was a conduit, a mirror, a window. It held fragments of her laughter, echoes of her tears, photographs of moments she'd almost forgotten, and the relentless hum of a world that never truly slept. Amelia had always been drawn to the subtle magic in the everyday. She saw the way light played on a wet pavement, the silent conversation between two strangers across a crowded cafe, the intricate patterns a single fallen leaf could etch onto the concrete. This sensibility, this quiet observation, was what made her art sing. But lately, she felt a strange, almost imperceptible shift in her own perception. It was as if a thin, translucent veil had settled over her senses, muting the vibrant hues of her world, softening the sharp edges of reality. She remembered a time, not so long ago, when her mornings began with the scent of brewing coffee and the quiet rustle of newspaper pages. Now, they began with a reflexive reach for the slab, its cool surface a familiar comfort against her palm. Before her eyes had even fully adjusted to the day, she would be scrolling, absorbing, reacting. News headlines, snippets of friends' lives, a perfectly curated image of a breakfast she would never eat. It was a ritual, a silent communion with the digital ether. One particularly gray Tuesday, the kind where the sky felt heavy with unspoken truths, Amelia found herself staring at her reflection in the darkened screen of her device. Her eyes, usually so expressive, seemed a little dimmer, a little more tired. She wondered briefly if the constant deluge of information, the endless stream of notifications, was siphoning something from her. Not energy precisely, but something more fundamental. A quietness of spirit, perhaps. A sense of unburdened presence. She thought of the old stories her grandmother used to tell, tales of forest spirits who would steal a person's shadow if they lingered too long in the twilight. Amelia didn't believe in forest spirits, not really, but there was a flicker of recognition in the metaphor. It felt as if something essential, something intrinsically hers, was being siphoned off, not by a mischievous sprite, but by the very fabric of her modern existence. It started subtly, as these things often do. A product advertisement would pop up on her social media feed, eerily tailored to a fleeting thought she'd had hours earlier. A conversation with a friend about a new brand of artisanal tea would somehow translate into sponsored posts for that exact tea, appearing on her screen within minutes. At first, she found it amusing, a testament to the uncanny intelligence of the algorithms. How do they know? She'd marvel, a slight thrill of wonder mixed with a pinch of unease. But the amusement began to curdle into something colder. It was like living in a house with invisible walls, where every whisper was overheard, every movement noted. She remembered researching a rare vintage camera for a client project. For weeks afterwards, her feeds were saturated with ads for camera equipment, photography workshops, even travel packages to scenic locations perfect for a photo shoot. It was relentless, a digital shadow following her everywhere, anticipating her desires before she even fully formed them. One evening, Amelia was sketching in her notebook, a rare analog indulgence. The rain had intensified, and the city outside was a blurred watercolor. She was designing a logo for a small, independent bookstore, a place that smelled of old paper and quiet contemplation. She found herself drawing a stylized inkwell, a feather quill. A sense of peace settled over her, a feeling of deep focus she hadn't experienced in weeks. Then, a vibration. Her slab, lying face down on her desk, pulsed with a gentle urgency, a notification, a new email from a marketing firm, subject line, "Unlock your inner author. Discover the best fountain pens and calligraphy supplies." Amelia stared at the screen, a chill tracing its way down her spine. She hadn't searched for fountain pens. She hadn't spoken about them aloud. The thought had existed solely within the sanctuary of her own mind, translated into ink on paper. Yet, here it was, mirrored back to her by the digital world. It was as if her thoughts, her most private and unvoiced inclinations, were no longer truly her own. They were being harvested, analyzed, and then sold back to her in the form of targeted advertising. The feeling was akin to walking into her apartment and finding a stranger sitting on her couch, calmly reading her diary. An intrusion so profound, so intimate that it left her breathless. She began to notice other things, the way her device seemed to listen. She'd be talking to a friend about a specific restaurant she wanted to try, and later that day, a banner ad for that very restaurant would appear on her browser. She'd dismiss it as coincidence, a trick of her own perception, but the coincidences accumulated, forming a pattern too distinct to ignore. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible pressure to conform, too. The algorithms, in their infinite wisdom, seemed to nudge her towards certain choices, certain lifestyles. Recommendations for clothing styles that were currently trending, articles about the must-have gadgets of the season, suggestions for vacation spots that were popular with people like her. It wasn't overt manipulation, not a direct command, but a gentle, persistent shaping of her desires, her interests, her very sense of self. One night, she had a vivid dream. She was in a vast, echoing hall, filled with countless glowing screens, each displaying a fragment of a human life. A laugh, a tear, a whispered secret, a fleeting desire. And in the center of this hall stood a towering, faceless entity, its form shifting and swirling like smoke, absorbing all these fragments, digesting them, and then spitting them back out in 1,000 different commodified forms. She woke up with a gasp, the dream clinging to her like a damp shroud. The next morning, she felt a profound sense of exhaustion, a weariness that went beyond mere lack of sleep. It was a soul weariness, a feeling that a part of her was constantly being observed, constantly being cataloged. She tried to articulate it to her friend Leo over a video call. "It's like, I'm living in a glass house," she explained, gesturing vaguely with her hands. "But the glass isn't transparent, it's a two-way mirror. I can see out, but everyone else can see in, and they're not just watching, they're taking notes." Leo, a software engineer with a pragmatic streak, nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's pretty much how it works, Amelia. Every tap, every scroll, every search query, it all leaves a trail, a digital breadcrumb. And those breadcrumbs are collected, analyzed, and used to build a profile of you. Your habits, your preferences, your potential future actions." "But why?" Amelia asked, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "What's the point of knowing everything?" Leo sighed, rubbing his temples. "For targeted advertising mostly, to sell you things, but also for predicting behavior, for understanding trends, for power, I guess. The more they know about you, the more influence they can potentially have." Influence. The word hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Amelia thought of her dream, of the faceless entity in the echoing hall. It wasn't just about selling her artisanal tea, it was about something far more insidious. It was about the subtle erosion of her autonomy, the quiet chipping away at her individuality. She started to experiment. She would intentionally search for things she had no interest in, just to see if she could throw the algorithms off. She'd look up obscure historical events, learn about ancient weaving techniques, research the mating habits of obscure deep-sea creatures. For a while, her feeds became a chaotic jumble of unrelated content, a digital carnival of the absurd. She felt a small, rebellious thrill, a tiny victory. But the algorithms were relentless. They adapted. They learned. Soon, even her attempts at digital subterfuge were incorporated into her profile. "User shows interest in diverse and eclectic topics," she imagined them noting. "Potential for niche market advertising." The walls of the glass house, it seemed, were impenetrable. One rainy afternoon, Amelia was walking through a park, her slab safely tucked away in her bag. She watched children chasing pigeons, their laughter echoing through the damp air. She saw an old man sketching on a bench, his face etched with concentration. She felt the cool mist on her skin, smelled the earthy scent of wet leaves. For a few precious moments, she was simply present, unburdened by the digital gaze. It was then that she saw the flyer tacked to a lamppost. It was handwritten, slightly smudged by the rain, and it announced a community meeting. Reclaiming Our Stories, the uneven letters declared. A discussion on digital well-being and mindful connection. Amelia felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark in the encroaching gloom. She tore the flyer from the lamppost, its damp paper clinging to her fingers. The meeting was held in the back room of a small, independent bookstore, a place that smelled reassuringly of old paper and quiet contemplation. There were about a dozen people, a motley crew of artists, activists, and concerned citizens. The air was thick with the scent of herbal tea and a shared sense of unease. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice, a retired librarian named Clara, was leading the discussion. She spoke of the erosion of privacy, the subtle ways technology was reshaping human interaction, the constant pressure to perform for an unseen audience. She didn't use jargon. She spoke from the heart, her words resonating with Amelia's own unspoken fears. "It's like we're giving away pieces of ourselves, little by little, without even realizing it," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. "Every click, every like, every search, it's all data. And that data, when aggregated, paints a picture of who we are. A picture that isn't always accurate and certainly isn't always ours to control." Another woman, a young student with bright, intense eyes, chimed in. "My generation grew up with this. We don't even know what it's like not to be online, not to have our lives documented and analyzed. It feels normal, but sometimes it feels like I'm living inside a giant spreadsheet." Amelia listened, a profound sense of recognition washing over her. She wasn't alone. Others felt it too. This subtle, pervasive sense of being watched, categorized, understood in ways that felt both intimate and entirely impersonal. Then, a man in the corner, a grizzled old journalist, spoke up. "We've traded convenience for something far more valuable. We've traded the quiet sanctity of our thoughts, the spontaneous nature of our desires, for the illusion of connection and the promise of tailored experiences. But what is the cost of that tailoring? What do we lose when our every whim is anticipated, our every need prepackaged?" His words struck Amelia like a physical blow. The cost. That was it, the hidden cost. She thought of her own life, of the moments she'd spent scrolling aimlessly, the hours lost to the digital void, the subtle ways her choices had been guided, nudged, influenced. She thought of the dream, of the faceless entity absorbing and spitting out fragments of human lives. She raised her hand, her voice a little shaky. I feel like I'm losing my sense of self," she confessed, the words tumbling out. "Like my thoughts aren't truly my own anymore. Like everything I do, everything I think is being recorded and used, and I don't know how to stop it." Clara smiled gently. "You've already taken the first step, Amelia. You've recognized it. You've named the feeling. And that's powerful, because once you see the threads, you can start to untangle them." The meeting ended with a sense of quiet determination. They talked about practical steps, turning off location services, limiting app permissions, using encrypted messaging apps, even considering digital detoxes, periods of intentional disconnection. But more than that, they talked about the importance of being present, of cultivating real-world connections, of protecting the inner sanctuary of one's own mind. Amelia walked home in the fading twilight, the rain having finally ceased. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, each reflection a tiny, independent star. She didn't reach for her slab. She simply walked, her thoughts drifting, unmonitored, not cataloged. When she arrived home, she placed her device on her desk, but she didn't turn it on. Instead, she picked up her sketchbook. She drew the old man in the park, the children chasing pigeons, the intricate patterns of a single fallen leaf. She drew Clara's kind eyes, the student's intense gaze, the journalist's grizzled face. She drew the quiet determination she saw reflected in their faces and in her own. She began to make small changes. She turned off most of her notifications. She started leaving her slab in a different room when she worked, only checking it at designated times. She rediscovered the joy of reading physical books, the comforting weight of paper in her hands. She met Leo for coffee in person, leaving her device at home, and found their conversation flowed more freely, more deeply, without the constant digital interruptions. It wasn't easy. The pull of the digital world was strong, a siren song of convenience and instant gratification. There were moments of weakness, moments when she felt the familiar urge to scroll, to check, to see what she was missing. But each time she resisted, she felt a tiny tremor of strength, a quiet reclaiming of her own space. She realized that the true magic wasn't in the glowing rectangle, but in the world outside it. In the unexpected conversations, the spontaneous discoveries, the quiet moments of contemplation that were truly her own. She began to see the vibrant hues of her world again, the sharp edges of reality returning, unmuted by any veil. One morning, she woke up to the sound of birdsong outside her window, not a digital chime. She made coffee, savoring the aroma, and then sat by the window, watching the city slowly come to life. She felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of unburdened presence. She picked up her slab, not out of habit, but with intention. She opened a blank document and began to type. She wanted to capture this feeling, this quiet revolution within herself. She wanted to articulate the subtle, insidious ways her attention had been fragmented, her thoughts monitored, her choices influenced. She wanted to tell a story about the hidden costs of convenience, about the unseen threads that connected her to a vast, unseen network, a network that knew her perhaps better than she knew herself. She typed for a long time, the words flowing freely, unmonitored, not cataloged. When she was finished, she leaned back, a sense of quiet accomplishment settling over her. She looked at the screen, at the words she had written, and then she typed the very last line. And in that moment of quiet reflection, Amelia realized she had been living in a constant state of surveillance. If you've enjoyed this episode, please visit our website at Deszicakes.com. Thanks for joining me on Unfiltered Reflection. Until next time, be kind to yourself, keep exploring, and remember, you are worthy, you are seen, and you are loved.